I'm Vicky, 58 years old from a small town in Kansas. All my life, cooking has been my way of showing love, especially on Thanksgiving. This year, I spent 3 days preparing a feast for my daughter Jessica, her husband Thomas, their kids, and his wealthy parents. I never expected that moment when my daughter would look me in the eyes with an expression I'd never seen before. She said those words that changed everything. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear about a time when you had to stand up for yourself against family. I became a single mother when Jessica was 8 years old. Her father decided that family life wasn't for him and left us for his secretary, a story so common it's almost a cliche. The divorce left me with nothing but debt, a small apartment, and the most precious thing in my world, my little girl with her gap-toothed smile and curious eyes. Those early years were a constant struggle. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, when bills piled up higher than my paycheck could reach. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and evenings were spent waiting tables at a local diner. On weekends, I'd pick up house cleaning jobs for extra cash. There were nights I pretended I'd already eaten so Jessica could have the last of the food in our fridge. I wore the same clothes for years, patching and mending until there was more thread than original fabric. But Jessica never went without the essentials. I made sure she had new shoes when she outgrew her old ones. Her school supplies were always complete, even if it meant I paid the electric bill late. Christmas and birthdays were modest but magical, with carefully wrapped gifts I'd saved for months to buy. Despite our struggles, Jessica grew up to be a compassionate, grateful child. She would make handmade cards for me just because. When I came home exhausted, she'd have a glass of water waiting and would tell me about her day with animated gestures. As she got older, she started helping around the apartment without being asked, understanding instinctively that we were a team. By the time Jessica was in high school, things had improved financially. I had worked my way up to office manager at the dental practice, and we moved to a small but decent house with a tiny backyard where I planted tomatoes and zucchini. Jessica blossomed into a brilliant student with a quick mind and determination that made me burst with pride. She earned a partial scholarship to State University, and I took out loans for the rest, knowing education was the ladder she needed. It was during her junior year of college that Jessica met Thomas. She brought him home for Thanksgiving, a tall, handsome business major with perfect teeth and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I noticed immediately how his eyes assessed my humble home, the slight tightening around his mouth when he saw our mismatched dining chairs. "Your mom's house is cozy," he said to Jessica later, not realizing I could hear from the kitchen. The way he said cozy made it clear he meant small and outdated. Jessica defended me, then saying, "Mom made a beautiful home for us on her own. I'm proud of what she's accomplished." Thomas came from old money. His father, Richard, was the CEO of a financial services company, and his mother, Linda, came from a family with deep roots in New England society. When Jessica first took me to meet them at their country club, I wore my best outfit, a navy blue dress from J.C. Penney that I'd saved for special occasions. Linda greeted me with air kisses and called me Vicky, despite Jessica correcting her twice. Richard shook my hand with the distracted air of someone meeting a person they would never need to remember. After Jessica and Thomas got engaged, I started noticing subtle changes in my daughter. Her calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, she'd ask why I still colored my own hair, or suggest updating my living room furniture. Once, she brought me a bag of clothes she'd outgrown that were clearly chosen to replace my wardrobe. I tried them on to please her, even though the styles made me feel like I was pretending to be someone else. The wedding was a lavish affair at a vineyard with 400 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I saved for a year to buy a proper mother of the bride dress. Jessica asked if I would consider professional makeup and hairstyling, offering to pay as a gift. I agreed, wanting to fit in with the elegant crowd, but hardly recognized myself in the mirror afterwards. After the honeymoon, Jessica and Thomas moved into a house in an affluent neighborhood with manicured lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. Their home had 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. When I visited for the first time, Jessica gave me a tour that felt more like a showcase than a homecoming. "The countertops are imported Italian marble," she explained, running her hand over the pristine surface. "And all the appliances are professional grade." I remember nodding, thinking about how my countertops were laminate that had begun peeling at the edges, but had served us well for countless homework sessions and cookie baking afternoons. As the years passed, Jessica and Thomas climbed the social ladder. Thomas became a partner at his investment firm. They joined the country club where his parents were members. Their vacations were to places I could only see in magazines, European capitals, and private islands. Our relationship stretched thinner with each passing year like a rubber band pulled to its limit. I tried everything to maintain our connection. I learned how to text and use social media to keep up with her life. I asked about her friends and remembered details about people I'd never met. When they invited me for dinner, I brought small gifts and made sure to compliment everything. Sometimes it felt like I was auditioning for the role of mother in my own daughter's life. The greatest joy came when Jessica told me she was pregnant. I cried happy tears imagining rocking my grandchild and passing down family stories. Emma was born on a spring morning perfect, with her tiny fingers and her father's blue eyes. I spent 2 weeks at their home helping with the newborn, doing laundry and cooking meals while Jessica recovered. "Mom, you don't fold the baby clothes correctly," Jessica said one afternoon, refolding tiny onesies I'd just finished washing. "They need to be done like this for proper storage." I swallowed my hurt and learned her method. When Thomas's mother visited, Jessica never corrected her, even when Linda put a diaper on backwards. 3 years later, Liam joined the family, a round-cheeked boy with a laugh that could light up a room. I treasured my grandchildren fiercely, but increasingly felt like an outsider during visits. The children were being raised with rigid schedules and activities I struggled to keep straight. Piano lessons at 4 years old, French tutoring, and swimming with a private coach. Once I brought Emma a stuffed bear I'd seen in a store window and thought she would love. Jessica took it away later, explaining their house had a cohesive aesthetic, and the toy didn't match the carefully curated decor of Emma's room. My grandchildren loved me, though. When no one was watching, Emma would climb into my lap for stories, and Liam would slip his small hand into mine. Those moments sustained me through the growing distance between Jessica and me. I held on to them like precious gems, turning them over in my memory during quiet evenings alone at home. Through it all, I never stopped believing that somewhere inside the polished, status-conscious woman my daughter had become was still the caring girl who once made me soup when I had the flu using only a can opener, and such fierce love it brought tears to my eyes. I kept hoping that girl would find her way back to me. When Jessica called in early November to ask if I would host Thanksgiving at my house, I nearly dropped the phone in surprise. For the past 6 years, holiday gatherings had been at their home with catered food and color-coordinated decorations that belonged in a magazine spread. "Are you sure?" I asked, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. "Yes," Jessica said, her tone brisk and efficient. "Thomas's house is being renovated, and our contractor fell behind schedule. The dining room will be unusable. Besides, the children have never experienced a holiday at your house." Despite her practical explanation, my heart soared with joy. Hosting Thanksgiving was a chance to reconnect with Jessica through the traditions we had shared when she was growing up. I could almost smell the sage and onion stuffing my grandmother had taught me to make, could feel the familiar rhythm of rolling pie crust between my palms. "That sounds wonderful," I said, already mentally rearranging my modest dining room to accommodate everyone. "Who all that will be coming?" "Just us, the kids, and Thomas's parents," Jessica replied. "Richard and Linda are looking forward to experiencing a more traditional Thanksgiving." The mention of Thomas's parents sent a flutter of anxiety through my chest. Their approval had always seemed just out of reach no matter how hard I tried. But this was my chance to welcome them into my world, to share the warmth and love that had always been the foundation of my home, even when money was tight. The next 3 weeks were a flurry of planning and preparation. I created a detailed budget, setting aside a portion of each paycheck for special ingredients. My usual grocery store wouldn't have everything I needed, so I researched where to find organic cranberries and the specific brand of butter Jessica preferred. I even ordered a heritage turkey from a local farm, stretching my budget to its limit. Every evening after work, I deep cleaned one area of my home. I washed the windows until they sparkled polished silverware that had belonged to my mother, and aired out the guest bedroom where Richard and Linda would stay. I bought new towels for the bathroom and a set of sheets with a higher thread count than I would normally choose for myself. The weekend before Thanksgiving, I pulled out the box of decorations from my attic. Many were handmade items Jessica had created in school: construction paper turkeys with feathers made from her traced handprints and pine cone centerpieces we had collected and assembled together. I arranged them carefully, hoping they would evoke happy memories rather than seem quaint or outdated to my daughter's more sophisticated tastes. Phone calls with Jessica during this period were increasingly stressful. What had started as general planning evolved into micromanagement. Remember Thomas's father is allergic to walnuts? She reminded me for the third time. And his mother only drinks filtered water, never tap. I've made a note of all the dietary restrictions, I assured her, glancing at the list I'd taped to my refrigerator door. And Mom, please use the good china, not those everyday plates. My good china was a set I'd collected piece by piece over years, buying a plate or cup whenever they went on sale. The pattern had been discontinued long ago, so they didn't all match perfectly, but they were the closest thing I had to formal dinnerware. Of course, I said, not mentioning that I had already purchased plastic cups for the children, knowing how nervous Jessica got when Emma and Liam used breakable items. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I began the marathon of cooking. My arthritis flared in the cold weather, making my fingers stiff and painful, but I pushed through. I baked pies, first apple and pumpkin and pecan, the crusts golden and flaky. Next came cranberry sauce from scratch, the berries popping in the pot as they released their tart juice. I prepared casseroles that could be refrigerated and baked on the day itself, green bean with crispy onion topping, sweet potatoes with brown sugar glaze, and my grandmother's special cornbread stuffing with sage and thyme I'd grown in pots on my back step. The work was exhausting but filled with purpose. With each dish I poured in not just ingredients but memories and hope. Hope that this meal would bridge the growing gap between my daughter and me. Hope that around my table we could find the connection that had been slipping away year by year. The evening before Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table making final preparations. My back ached from standing all day and my hands were raw from washing dishes. But looking around at the pies cooling on racks, the brined turkey ready for roasting, and the neatly written schedule for tomorrow's cooking, I felt a deep satisfaction. I thought about Thanksgivings past, when Jessica was young and we couldn't afford much. Some years we had chicken instead of turkey because it was cheaper. Our sides were simple mashed potatoes and stuffing, maybe a can of cranberry sauce if it was on sale. But we would draw pictures of what we were thankful for while the food cooked, and Jessica always put me at the top of her list, just as she was at the top of mine. Please, I whispered to no one in particular as I turned off the kitchen light, let tomorrow remind her of what matters. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. I was up before the sun, sliding the massive turkey into the oven, its skin rubbed with herb butter and seasoned just right. The house filled with the comforting aroma of roasting meat and fresh bread as I worked through my carefully planned schedule. By the time the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, everything was ready. The table was set with my best linens, a centerpiece of autumn leaves and candles arranged just so, and warming dishes ready to keep everything at the perfect temperature. I had even managed a quick shower and change into a new sweater I'd bought specially for the occasion. A warm burgundy color that Jessica once said looked nice with my silver hair. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door with a welcoming smile, ready to embrace my family and the opportunity this day represented. Grandma, Emma's voice rang out as she burst through the door, first wrapping her arms around my waist in a tight hug that warmed me from the inside out. There's my sweet girl, I said, kneeling down despite my aching knees to look into her bright eyes. And look how you've grown. 6-year-old Liam followed, more reserved than his sister, but still offering a shy smile and accepting my hug before darting past to explore my living room, immediately drawn to the collection of seashells I kept on a low shelf. These natural treasures, gathered from rare beach trips over the years, had always fascinated my grandchildren. Jessica and Thomas came next, my daughter beautiful in an expensive cashmere sweater and designer jeans, her hair styled in a way that made her look like she had just stepped out of a salon rather than a 2-hour car ride. She gave me a quick perfunctory hug, the kind strangers might exchange at a social function. The house looks nice, Mom, she said, her eyes scanning my modest living room. Did you rearrange the furniture? Just a bit, I replied, having spent hours trying different configurations to make the space seem larger. To make room for everyone. Thomas nodded curtly in greeting, immediately checking his phone as he crossed my threshold. We had to park quite a distance down the street, he commented. The neighbors must be having some kind of gathering as well. The Johnsons always host a big Thanksgiving, I explained. Their children and grandchildren all come home. Thomas replied, clearly uninterested. The turkey smells adequate. Before I could respond to this backhanded compliment, Richard and Linda arrived bringing with them the distinct aura of wealth that seemed to cling to their designer clothes and carefully maintained appearances. Richard, tall and imposing with silver hair and sharp eyes, surveyed my home with the calculated assessment of someone appraising property. "Quaint place you have here, Vicky," he said, handing me a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Very representative of this neighborhood." Linda, petite and elegant in a silk blouse and perfectly tailored slacks, offered air kisses near my cheeks. "We brought our own pillows for the guest room," she said in a stage whisper. "Richard has terrible allergies, you understand." "Of course," I said, maintaining my smile while leading them toward the dining room where appetizers were already laid out. "Please make yourselves comfortable. There are drinks in the kitchen." The initial atmosphere was pleasant enough on the surface. Emma proudly showed her grandparents the handprint turkey she had made at my house during a previous visit, which I had framed and displayed on the wall. Liam was fascinated by my collection of old vinyl records, carefully examining the colorful covers while I explained what they were. But beneath the veneer of civility, tensions simmered like a pot about to boil over. Jessica began rearranging my carefully set table, almost immediately swapping the position of wine and water glasses, refolding napkins to her preference. "Mom, the forks go on this side," she corrected, though I had placed them correctly. Thomas sampled the wine Richard had brought, swirling it in his glass with exaggerated motions. "Shame we couldn't bring proper glassware," he remarked to his father. "These don't really allow the bouquet to develop." The cut was small but precise, a reminder that my best crystal glasses weren't good enough for their standards. I busied myself bringing out more appetizers, focusing on the familiar rhythm of hosting rather than the sting of the comment. The children were my saving grace during those first uncomfortable hours. Emma helped me arrange crackers on a serving plate, her small hands careful and precise. Liam sat at my feet in the kitchen for a while, asking questions about how gravy was made and watching with fascination as I stirred the bubbling mixture. "Grandma, your house always smells so good," Emma said, reaching for a deviled egg, "like cookies and cinnamon." "That's because Grandma knows the secret ingredient to make a house smell like home," I told her, tapping her nose gently. "Love." "Jessica, perhaps you should check if your mother needs help," I overheard Linda say in the living room. "Though I'm not sure this level of cooking is what you're used to anymore. Remember that disastrous chicken casserole you made when you and Thomas first got married?" Jessica's laugh sounded forced. Mom's always been stuck in her ways with cooking. Very traditional, very middle America. Nothing like the Mediterranean fusion chef Marcel prepared for our dinner party last month. The words floated into the kitchen where I stood alone, a dish towel clutched in my suddenly trembling hands. Stuck in her ways. Very middle America. As if my cooking, the one gift I had always been proud to share, was somehow provincial and outdated. Thomas's voice joined the conversation. "Remember that Christmas when Vicky brought that homemade fruitcake? I think we still have it somewhere hard as a brick." Laughter followed Richard's deep chuckle, particularly cutting. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the days I had spent preparing that fruitcake using my grandmother's recipe, soaking the fruits in expensive brandy I couldn't really afford. I had been so proud to contribute something special to their catered holiday spread. The afternoon continued with similar small cuts. Thomas commenting on the interesting choice of my living room paint color. Richard asking if my neighborhood was safe these days, with emphasis that suggested he doubted it. Linda picking up a family photo and remarking that Jessica looked like she had just started that unfortunate weight gain period in the image. As dinner time approached, I retreated to my kitchen, seeking solace in the final preparations. My hands, though aching, moved with practiced confidence as I made gravy from the turkey drippings, whisking until it was silky smooth without a single lump. "Mom, do you need help?" Jessica appeared in the doorway, her tone suggesting she expected the answer to be yes. "I'm just about finished," I replied. "Would you mind calling everyone to the table? The turkey needs to rest for a few minutes before carving." Jessica frowned, glancing around my kitchen with its dated cabinets and well-used appliances. "Your stove is so old," she observed. "Wouldn't you rather have something more modern? Thomas and I could help you upgrade." The offer, while perhaps well-intentioned, felt like another criticism. My stove had served me faithfully for 15 years. It wasn't fancy, but it had produced countless meals made with care and attention. It works just fine for me, I said, keeping my voice light. Some things get better with age. Jessica didn't smile at my small joke. Instead, she reached over and adjusted the collar of my sweater. Your tag was showing pun is, she said, then paused, looking at my face critically. You missed a spot with your foundation right near your jawline, and your lipstick is a little dated color-wise. We should go shopping sometime. Sephora has some wonderful options for mature skin. Each word felt like a tiny pin inserted under my skin. I had spent extra time on my appearance today wanting to look nice for the occasion. To have my efforts so casually dismissed by my own daughter made my chest tighten with hurt. I took a deep breath and turned back to the stove. Could you please call everyone to the table? The food is ready. As everyone gathered in the dining room, I brought out the masterpiece of the meal, the roast turkey, golden brown and perfect after hours of careful attention. The bird was magnificent, if I did say so myself, moist and fragrant with herbs and butter. Well, I'm surprised, Richard said as I placed it at the head of the table. That actually looks professionally done, Vicky. Another backhanded compliment that seemed designed to remind me of my place in their estimation. I simply smiled and began arranging the other dishes around the table, a colorful abundance of traditional Thanksgiving foods prepared with skill and care. When it came time to sit down, I noticed for the first time the seating arrangement Jessica had created. Thomas sat at one end of the table with his parents on either side, then the children. Jessica sat next to her mother-in-law. My place was noticeably separate, almost disconnected from the main family group at the far end opposite Thomas. As everyone took their places, Thomas began making jokes about my neighborhood, the quaint local stores, and the interesting characters he had seen on the street when they arrived. I'm sure Vicky feels perfectly safe here, he said with a laugh, though I wouldn't leave my car parked on this street overnight. Thomas, Linda surprisingly chided. That's enough. I kept my smile in place through sheer force of will, focusing instead on the beautiful table I had created. The turkey glistened in the center, surrounded by colorful side dishes in my best serving bowls. Candlelight flickered on the wall, creating a warm glow that softened the room's modest features. Everything looks delicious, Grandma, Emma said loyally, her small face earnest. Thank you, sweetheart. Shall we serve? Thomas began carving the turkey with exaggerated expertise, commenting on the knife quality as he did so. Platters began circulating around the table, each person serving themselves from the abundant offerings. When all the dishes had made their way around and everyone had filled their plates, I reached for the mashed potatoes to serve myself. That's when it happened. Jessica's hand shot out, stopping mine in midair. The table fell silent. Mom, she said, her voice clear and cold in the sudden quiet. You'll eat after everyone else is served. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry. Jessica met my gaze directly, her eyes holding an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of embarrassment and strange determination. The help eats after the family is served. That's how it's done in proper homes. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The help. My own daughter had just classified me as the help in my own home at my own table after I had spent days cooking this meal with my own hands. Time seemed to stop. I could hear the tick of the clock on the wall, the soft breathing of the children, the nearly imperceptible gasp from Linda. Richard looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Thomas studied his wineglass, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of his mouth. In that suspended moment, a memory surfaced with startling clarity. Jessica, at 12 years old, standing up to a neighbor who had spoken rudely to me at a community picnic. My fierce little girl, hands on her hips, saying, Don't talk to my mom like that. She deserves respect. Where had that girl gone? When had she transformed into this woman who could look me in the eye and deny me a place at my own table? The realization crashed over me in waves. This wasn't about seating arrangements or social norms. This was about my daughter showing her husband and in-laws that she had moved beyond her origins, that she was now one of them. And the price of her acceptance into their world was my humiliation. In that moment, something broke and reformed inside me. The hurt was there, a physical ache in my chest, but rising through it came a clarity I hadn't felt in years. A recognition of my own worth that had nothing to do with expensive houses or designer clothes or what anyone else thought of me. Without a word, I stood up. The scrape of my chair against the floor sounded unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I walked to the head of the table, my movements deliberate and calm. I picked up the platter with what remained of the turkey, the beautiful bird I had risen before dawn to prepare. Mom. Jessica's voice held a note of confusion. I didn't answer. I simply gathered the roast in my hands, feeling its weight still warm through the oven mitts I hastily grabbed. Then I turned and walked toward the front door. Mom, what are you doing? Jessica's voice rose in alarm behind me. I paused at the door, turkey in hand, and looked back at the tableau of my family frozen in surprise around my dining table. The perfectly arranged food, the flickering candles, the faces turned toward me in various states of shock. In that moment, I saw it all with perfect clarity, the years of small submissions and quiet acceptances that had led to this moment. And I knew with bone-deep certainty that I could not take one more. Without another word, I opened the door and walked out into the crisp November air, carrying with me the literal fruit of my labor and a newfound determination that would change everything. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, a bracing slap that matched the emotional earthquake happening inside me. I walked to my car, unlocked it with trembling hands, and placed the turkey carefully on the passenger seat, securing it with the seatbelt as if it were a precious passenger. For a moment, I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering column, not yet turning the key. Tears threatened a burning pressure behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. This wasn't a time for crying. This was a time for action, for finally standing up for myself after years of shrinking to fit the space others allotted me. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, catching a glimpse of my front door in the rearview mirror. Jessica stood there, her mouth open in what might have been a call for me to stop, but I couldn't hear her through the closed windows and the rushing of blood in my ears. With no destination in mind, I drove through my familiar neighborhood streets, past houses with cars parked in driveways and smoke rising from chimneys, families gathered inside around tables much like mine. What were they saying to each other in those warm, lit rooms? Were they being kind? Did they see each other clearly, or were they like my family, caught in roles and expectations that had nothing to do with love? The questions circled in my mind as I drove aimlessly, turning randomly at intersections, moving further from my home with each mile. The turkey sat beside me, a strange companion on this unexpected journey, its aroma filling the car with the scent of herbs and butter. I don't know how long I drove before I noticed the sign for the downtown community center, its parking lot unusually full for a holiday. A banner hung across the entrance, "Annual Thanksgiving Dinner for All, 12:06 p.m." Without conscious decision, I turned into the lot and found an empty space near the back. Sitting in my car, watching people enter and exit the building, some clearly volunteers in aprons, others with the worn look of those who had nowhere else to go for the holiday, I felt a strange sense of rightness. I gathered the turkey platter and made my way to the entrance. Inside, the community center gymnasium had been transformed with long tables covered in paper tablecloths, centerpieces made of pine cones and paper leaves, and a serving line along one wall. The room hummed with conversation and occasional laughter, a warm contrast to the strained silence that had filled my dining room. "Can I help you?" Woman approached, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing an apron with volunteer coordinator pinned to the front. "I have this turkey." I said the words sounding strange to my own ears. "It's fresh, just cooked today. I thought maybe you could use it." The woman's face lit up. "Are you serious?" "We just ran out of our last one and we've still got 2 hours to go. This is perfect timing. I'm Martha, by the way." "Vicky," I replied, something in her open, friendly face inviting immediate trust. "I'm happy it can be useful." "Useful? It's a miracle is what it is." Martha took the platter, examining the turkey with appreciation. "This is beautifully done. You clearly know your way around a kitchen." The simple compliment, freely given without agenda or backhanded component, warmed me unexpectedly. "Thank you, it's my grandmother's recipe." Martha gestured toward the serving line. "Would you like to stay and help? We can always use another pair of hands, unless you need to get back to your family." The question hung between us, carrying more weight than Martha could possibly know. Did I need to get back to my family? The family that had just classified me as the help? The daughter who had decided I wasn't good enough to sit at my own table? "No," I said finally. "I don't need to get back. I'd love to help." Martha handed me an apron, and within minutes I was stationed at the serving line, carving the turkey I had brought and placing portions on plates held by a diverse parade of community members. Some were clearly homeless, their clothes worn and layered against the November chill. Others appeared to be students unable to travel home for the holiday or elderly folks who had no family nearby. A few families with young children came through the parents with the tired, stressed look of those working hard to make ends meet. What struck me most was how each person looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you," as I served them. Simple human acknowledgement, the basic courtesy that had been so glaringly absent at my own table. About an hour into my impromptu volunteering, I realized my phone had been vibrating repeatedly in my pocket. I stepped away from the serving line during a lull and checked the screen. 12 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from Jessica, ranging from confused, "Mom, where did you go?" to angry, "How could you embarrass us like this?" to demanding, "Come back right now, you're ruining Thanksgiving." Thomas had texted once, "Your behavior is completely inappropriate. Jessica is upset." Surprisingly, there was also a message from Linda. "I don't blame you one bit. Call me when you can." I turned off the phone and returned to the serving line, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of filling plates and exchanging smiles with strangers. No judgments here about my home's decor or my cooking techniques, or whether I was worthy of sitting at the table. As the evening progressed, I found myself talking with Martha during breaks, sharing bits of our lives. She was a retired school principal who had started the community Thanksgiving dinner 10 years ago after her husband died. "The first year I did it just to have somewhere to go, honestly," she confided as we refilled water pitchers. "Being alone on the holidays was too hard. But then I realized how many people needed this, not just the meal, but the connection. Now it's my favorite day of the year." "It's remarkable what you've created here," I said, looking around at the room full of people from all walks of life sharing food and conversation. "Everyone needs somewhere they belong," Martha replied simply. "Somewhere they're valued just for being themselves." Her words resonated through me like a tuning fork struck against stone. When was the last time I had felt valued just for being myself? Not for what I could provide or how I could serve, but simply for existing as I was. As the event wound down around 6 o'clock, Martha invited me to join her and several other volunteers for a late dinner at her home. "We always have a little after party," she explained. "Nothing fancy, just leftovers, and maybe a glass of wine, but good company." Without hesitation, I accepted. The thought of returning to my empty house with its table still set for a family that had rejected me was unbearable. Martha's invitation offered a life raft in what felt like stormy emotional waters. Martha's home was a 1920s bungalow, not unlike my own, though she had renovated it with bright, cheerful colors and eclectic furniture that reflected a life well lived and thoroughly enjoyed. 6 of us gathered around her kitchen table, a mismatched collection of volunteers ranging from a college student named Jamal to an elderly woman named Dorothy who had once been a concert pianist. We ate turkey sandwiches and leftover pie, drinking wine from ordinary glasses and sharing stories that wandered from funny holiday disasters to meaningful life moments. No one commented on anyone else's clothes or homes or social status. No one made cutting remarks disguised as jokes or helpful suggestions. It was simply human connection in its purest form. "To new friends," Martha toasted, raising her glass, "and to being exactly who we are." As I raised my glass with the others, I felt something shift inside me, a piece of myself that had been bent out of shape slowly beginning to straighten. The hurt of what had happened was still there, a throbbing wound that would take time to heal. But alongside it grew a new certainty, a recognition that I deserved better than what my daughter and her husband had offered me today. When I finally checked my phone again, there were more messages, including one from Jessica that simply said, "Fine, we've cleaned up your mess and we're leaving. Thanks for nothing." Linda had texted again, "We're going. I want you to know I think what Jessica said was terrible. Thomas has become someone I don't always recognize, and I'm afraid he's influencing Jessica in ways that break my heart. I'm so sorry, Vicky." This unexpected alliance surprised me. Linda, who had always seemed to epitomize the wealthy, judgmental world that had claimed my daughter, was reaching out with what appeared to be genuine empathy. Martha offered me her guest room when she saw my face after reading the messages, but I declined gently. I needed to go home to face my empty house and begin figuring out what came next. We exchanged phone numbers with promises to meet for coffee soon, and I hugged her goodbye with the warmth usually reserved for old friends. The drive home was different from my earlier aimless wandering. Now I moved with purpose, my mind clear despite the emotional exhaustion weighing on my body. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. No cars remained on the street. They had all gone, taking with them the illusion that I could somehow earn my daughter's respect by trying harder, cooking better, or changing myself to fit their expectations. Inside, the dining room told the story of their hasty departure. Dishes had been cleared, but carelessly, with gravy smears on the tablecloth and a wineglass tipped over, leaving a stain on the linen. The candles had burned down unevenly and been extinguished with little regard for the wax that had dripped onto my best candlesticks. But in the kitchen, surprisingly, the dishes had been washed and stacked neatly in the drying rack. A note in unfamiliar handwriting sat on the counter. "Thank you for your hospitality. The food was delicious. Linda." I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had worked so hard preparing for this day, and finally let the tears come. They weren't just tears of hurt or anger, though those emotions coursed through me like electric currents. They were also tears of release, of letting go of a version of my relationship with Jessica that clearly no longer existed, if it ever had. As the tears slowed, I made myself a cup of tea and looked around my kitchen, seeing it through new eyes. This wasn't a dated space that needed upgrading. This was the heart of my home, where I had created thousands of meals with love and care. The worn spots on the countertop marked years of rolling pie crusts and kneading bread dough. The small burn mark on the floor remembered the Christmas I dropped the ham but saved it in time to serve. These weren't flaws to be corrected, they were the physical manifestations of a life lived authentically. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Home safe, left you with good thoughts." I smiled at this small kindness from a woman who had been a stranger just hours ago. "Yes and yes," I replied. "Thank you for everything today." As I got ready for bed, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, I realized that for the first time in years, I would sleep without the background anxiety of wondering if I was measuring up to Jessica's standards, without mentally reviewing every interaction for hidden criticisms or judgments. The realization was both liberating and profoundly sad. Tomorrow would bring hard decisions and uncomfortable conversations. But tonight, I would rest in the knowledge that I had finally stood up for myself, had refused to accept treatment that diminished my worth as a person. The turkey I had carried out of my house had fed strangers who showed me more respect in a few hours than my daughter had in years. And somehow, in losing the Thanksgiving I had planned so carefully, I had found something far more valuable: the first steps back to myself. The sharp trill of the doorbell woke me the next morning, pulling me from a surprisingly deep sleep despite the emotional turbulence of the previous day. Blinking away confusion, I glanced at the clock, 8:17 a.m. The bell rang again, more insistent this time, followed by rapid knocking. I pulled on my robe and made my way to the door, already knowing who I would find on the other side. Jessica's car sat in my driveway, its luxury sedan lines looking out of place against my modest home. When I opened the door, my daughter burst in without waiting for an invitation, her face flushed with anger, her designer purse clutched in white-knuckled hands. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice vibrating with emotion. "What were you thinking walking out like that? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" I closed the door quietly and took a deep breath, gathering the calm clarity I had found yesterday. "Good morning, Jessica. Would you like some coffee?" My measured response seemed to further inflame her. "Coffee, you're offering me coffee." "Mom, you walked out of Thanksgiving dinner with the turkey. Thomas's parents were there. How could you humiliate me like that?" I moved past her to the kitchen, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove with deliberate movements. "I didn't walk out of Thanksgiving dinner, Jessica. I was informed I wasn't welcome to eat at the table with my family in my own home. There's a difference." Jessica followed me, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum floor. "That's not what happened. You completely overreacted to a simple comment." I turned to face her directly. "A simple comment. You told me that the help eats after the family is served. In my own home, after I spent 3 days cooking that meal. How exactly should I have reacted to being classified as the household staff?" For a brief moment, a flicker of shame crossed Jessica's face before she rallied. "You're twisting my words. I just meant that as the host, you should make sure everyone else is taken care of first. It's proper etiquette." "No," I said, keeping my voice level but firm. "That's not what you said, and that's not what you meant. You wanted to impress Thomas and his parents by showing them that you've moved beyond your upbringing, that you're now one of them, not one of me." The kettle whistled, and I turned to prepare 2 mugs of coffee, giving Jessica a moment to process my words. When I turned back, tears had replaced some of the anger in her expression. "You don't understand the pressure," she said, her voice dropping. "You have no idea what it's like being married to Thomas, trying to fit in with his family and their friends. Everything I do is scrutinized. What I wear, how I speak, how I raise the children. And you thought demeaning your mother would help you fit in?" I asked, quietly placing a mug of coffee in front of her. "Is that the kind of acceptance worth having?" Jessica sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's complicated, Mom. Thomas's family has expectations. They've opened doors for me for us. The country club membership, the introductions to important people, the right schools for the kids, and the price for all that is erasing where you came from, who your mother is." "I haven't erased anything," Jessica protested, but the words lacked conviction. "I've just evolved, grown beyond this." She gestured vaguely at the kitchen around us. The words stung, but I refused to let the hurt derail the conversation we needed to have. "This is who I am, Jessica. This house, these things, the way I live my life. I'm not ashamed of any of it. I worked hard to give you a good home and opportunities I never had. If you're ashamed of me now, that's your burden to carry, not mine." Jessica's face crumpled slightly. "I'm not ashamed of you. I just want more for you. Better things. Better according to whom? Thomas's parents. The people at your country club." I sat down across from her. "I don't need or want better things if they come with the condition that I become someone else to deserve them." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the steam rising from our untouched coffee mugs, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking the passage of this watershed moment between us. The sound of a car door slamming broke the silence. Jessica tensed visibly. "That's Thomas. I told him to wait in the car, but he never listens." Heavy footsteps approached, and then Thomas appeared in my kitchen doorway, his tall frame seeming to fill the space with an energy that immediately set my teeth on edge. He didn't bother with a greeting. "This has gone on long enough," he announced, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. "Jessica has been upset all night because of your little stunt. I think it's time you apologize so we can all move past this ridiculous situation." I looked at him calmly. "Good morning to you too, Thomas. I won't be apologizing for removing myself from a situation where I was being disrespected in my own home." His expression hardened. "Disrespected Jessica was simply trying to help you understand proper protocol for formal dining. If anyone should apologize, it's you for embarrassing everyone and ruining the holiday." "Thomas," Jessica said, a warning note in her voice. "We agreed I would handle this." "Clearly, you're not handling anything," he snapped at her before turning back to me. "Look, Vicky, I understand you're from a different background where certain social norms might not be familiar. But when you're hosting people of a certain standing, there are expectations." The condescension in his tone was breathtaking. I stood up slowly, straightening to my full height, which still left me looking up at him but somehow didn't feel diminishing anymore. "In my home, Thomas, the only expected protocol is basic human decency and respect. Everyone is welcome at my table as an equal regardless of their bank account or social connections." Thomas's face flushed red. This attitude is exactly why Jessica has had such a hard time advancing socially. Your limited perspective holds her back. Do you have any idea the strings I've had to pull to help her overcome her background? My background. Jessica echoed softly, something shifting in her expression as she looked at her husband. Thomas either didn't notice or didn't care about the effect of his words. He plowed ahead, his voice rising. "Do you know what people would think if they knew Jessica's mother lives in this neighborhood? Shops at discount stores, colors her own hair, the country club board is very particular about family connections." Each word was meant to wound, to remind me of my place in his estimation. But strangely, they had the opposite effect. With each attempted cut, I felt stronger, more certain of my own worth, independent of his judgment. "I am not ashamed of where I live, where I shop, or how I color my hair," I said evenly. "Those things don't determine my value as a person. And if your social circle judges my daughter by such superficial standards, perhaps you should reconsider the company you keep, not your relationship with her mother. Thomas's laugh was cold. Easy for you to say. You don't understand what's at stake. My position at the firm, our children's future connections, our standing in the community, and all of that is threatened by having a middle-class mother-in-law. If your position is that precarious, Thomas, perhaps you're not as important as you think you are. The words landed like a slap. Thomas's eyes narrowed dangerously. Be very careful, Vicky. You might want to remember who pays for Emma's private school tuition and Liam's tennis lessons, who covered the cost when your roof leaked last year. So there it was, the financial threat I had been waiting for. The implication that my access to my grandchildren, the help I occasionally accepted, all of it could be withdrawn if I didn't know my place. I never asked for your money, Thomas, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. I accepted it because Jessica wanted me to, because it made her happy to help. But if financial assistance comes with the condition that I accept disrespect and humiliation, then I don't want or need it. Mom, Jessica interjected, her voice strained. Don't be hasty. Thomas doesn't mean that. I know exactly what he means, I said, keeping my eyes on Thomas. He's making it very clear that in his world, money buys the right to treat people however you want. That's not a world I choose to live in. Before Thomas could respond, another car pulled into my driveway, visible through the kitchen window. To my astonishment, Linda emerged from a taxi, paid the driver, and walked briskly toward my front door. What is she doing here? Thomas demanded, turning to Jessica, who looked equally confused. The doorbell rang, and I moved past them both to answer it. Linda stood on my porch, immaculately dressed as always, but with an uncharacteristic nervousness in her posture. Vicky, she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. I hope it's not too early. I wanted to speak with you to apologize properly for yesterday. I invited her in, leading her to the kitchen, where Thomas and Jessica had both fallen silent in surprise at her appearance. Mother, Thomas said, what are you doing here? Linda straightened her shoulders, something steely entering her gaze as she looked at her son. I'm here to do what you apparently haven't, Thomas. I'm here to apologize to Vicky for the appalling way she was treated in her own home yesterday. That's unnecessary, Thomas began, but Linda cut him off with a raised hand. It is entirely necessary and long overdue. She turned to me. Vicky, I am deeply sorry for my silence yesterday when Jessica said those terrible things to you. I should have spoken up immediately. There is no excuse for treating anyone that way, especially not someone who had worked so hard to welcome us into their home. The sincere apology coming from the last person I would have expected momentarily robbed me of words. I nodded in acknowledgement, touched by her unexpected alliance. Linda wasn't finished. She turned to her son, her expression hardening. Thomas, I've watched with increasing distress as you've encouraged Jessica to distance herself from her mother, as you've made snide comments about Vicky's home, her work, her life. It stops today. Mother, you don't understand, Thomas began, but Linda again interrupted him. I understand perfectly. I understand because your father and I bear some responsibility for the man you've become. We emphasize status and connections over character. We taught you that money could solve any problem, open any door. And in the process, we failed to ensure you understood the fundamental importance of basic human decency. Jessica stared at her mother-in-law in open astonishment. Thomas's face had gone from red to white. The way you've been treating Vicky, Linda continued, reminds me far too much of how your father treated my parents. They were school teachers who never had much money. He made me ashamed of them, embarrassed to bring them to social functions. I let him isolate me from the people who had loved me unconditionally all my life. It is the greatest regret of my life, and I will not stand by and watch history repeat itself. The kitchen fell silent after this revelation. I looked at Linda with new eyes, seeing beyond the designer clothes and perfect hair to the woman beneath someone who had walked a path similar to Jessica's and recognized the cost too late. Thomas was the first to recover. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting just like Vicky. It was one comment at dinner, hardly the crime of the century. It wasn't just one comment, Jessica said suddenly, her voice small but clear. It was the culmination of years of subtle and not so subtle messages that mom isn't good enough, that I should be embarrassed by where I came from. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I got lost somewhere along the way. I started believing that all these external things, the house, the club membership, the right schools, were more important than the relationships that actually matter. Thomas stared at his wife in disbelief. Jessica, you can't be serious. After everything we've built, everything I've done for you, you're siding with them? I'm not siding with anyone, Jessica replied. I'm recognizing that I've made choices that hurt my mother deeply, choices I need to take responsibility for. The crack in Thomas's controlled facade widened. Your mother walked out of Thanksgiving dinner with our turkey. She embarrassed us in front of my parents, and now you're apologizing to her. Yes, Jessica said simply, because she deserves an apology. What I said was cruel and inexcusable. Thomas's hand came down hard on my kitchen counter. This is absurd. I'm not standing here listening to this. Jessica, we're leaving. Now. Jessica didn't move. I'm staying to talk with my mother. You can take the car if you need to go. The shock on Thomas's face might have been comical in another context. He was clearly unaccustomed to Jessica defying him in any way. Fine, have your little heart-to-heart, but don't expect me to pretend everything is normal when you get home. He stormed out the front door, slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. A moment later, his car engine roared to life and tires squealed as he pulled away. The three of us, Jessica, Linda, and I, remained in my kitchen, the tension slowly dissolving into an uncertain calm. Well, Linda said finally, that went about as expected. Thomas has never handled contradiction well, I'm afraid. Another parenting failure we'll have to address. Jessica looked at her mother-in-law with new respect. I've never heard you speak to him that way. It's long overdue, Linda replied. For what it's worth, Jessica, Richard, and I have been increasingly concerned about some of Thomas's attitudes and behaviors. This incident has made it clear we can no longer remain silent. Jessica nodded, then turned to me. Mom, I don't even know where to begin. What I said to you yesterday was unforgivable. Nothing is unforgivable between a mother and daughter, I said gently. But forgiveness doesn't mean we don't need to address what happened and why. I know, Jessica agreed. I've been thinking about it all night. About how I've changed, how I've let myself become someone I don't even recognize sometimes. Someone who could speak to her own mother that way. Perhaps, Linda suggested, this is a conversation that needs time and space. Jessica, why don't you and your mother plan to meet later today or tomorrow, after emotions have cooled somewhat? And I should probably get back to the hotel. Richard will be wondering where I've gone. It was a sensible suggestion. Jessica and I agreed to meet the following day for lunch, just the two of us. Linda called another taxi, and before she left, she surprised me with a genuine hug. Thank you for standing up for yourself yesterday, she whispered. You may have done more good than you know. After they had both gone, I stood in my quiet house feeling strangely light, as if some heavy burden I had carried for years had been set down at last. There would be difficult conversations ahead, boundaries to establish trust, to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about my relationship with my daughter. And more importantly, I felt at peace with myself, with who I was and the life I had built. No matter what happened next, I had found my voice again. I had remembered my own worth. And that more than any Thanksgiving feast was something to be truly grateful for. 3 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I stood in my kitchen preparing for a dinner party, my hands moving confidently as I arranged appetizers on a serving platter. So much had changed in these winter months, both within me and in my relationships with those around me. My weekly volunteer position at the downtown community center had become a cornerstone of my new life. Every Wednesday, I helped Martha and the team prepare meals for anyone who needed them. Sometimes we fed 100 people, sometimes only 20, but the work always left me with a profound sense of purpose. You have a gift, Vicky, Martha had told me one afternoon as we chopped vegetables side by side. Not just for cooking, but for making people feel welcomed and valued. Through Martha, my social circle had expanded in ways I never would have imagined. I'd met Denise, a retired librarian with a wicked sense of humor who had become my movie-going buddy. James, a widower in his 60s who taught piano at the community college and shared my love of classic jazz. Eleanor, a former corporate executive who had left the rat race to start a small bakery and now supplied desserts for the community meals. These new friends had no expectations of who I should be or how I should live. They accepted me exactly as I was, appreciated what I offered, and gave freely of themselves in return. The contrast to my previous social interactions within Jessica and Thomas's circle was stark and illuminating. Perhaps most surprisingly, I had finally begun taking the art classes I'd dreamed about for decades. Every Saturday morning, I sat in a sunlit studio at the community center, learning to capture light and shadow, form and space under the patient guidance of an instructor who insisted there were no mistakes in art, only opportunities for creative solutions. My first completed painting, a simple, still life of apples in a blue bowl, hung proudly on my kitchen wall, imperfect, but entirely mine. The relationship with my daughter was healing slowly, like a broken bone that needed time and proper care to mend correctly. Our first lunch after Thanksgiving had been tearful and raw, both of us excavating years of accumulated hurts and misunderstandings. I think it started when I met Thomas. Jessica had confessed over soup and sandwiches at a quiet cafe far from her usual haunts. His world seemed so perfect, so assured. The way his family lived, the ease with which they moved through life, as if certain doors would always open for them. I wanted that certainty, that belonging. And you felt you couldn't have that if you remained connected to your origins. I had said not as an accusation, but as an understanding. Jessica nodded, tears welling. Thomas never explicitly said I needed to change to distance myself from you. It was more subtle than that. Comments about how refreshing it was that I didn't have certain provincial attitudes. Praise when I adopted the mannerisms and interests of his circle. Eventually, I started seeing myself and where I came from through his eyes. We had agreed that day to begin therapy both individually and together. Finding a therapist who specialized in family relationships had been Jessica's idea, a concrete step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Our sessions were sometimes difficult, exposing patterns and dynamics we had both contributed to over the years, but they were always honest, and honesty was the foundation we needed. Thomas's reaction to these changes had been predictable. Initial fury followed by attempts to reassert control through financial means. When those failed, he had retreated into cold detachment, speaking to Jessica only when necessary, and refusing to participate in any family counseling. "He'll come around or he won't," Jessica had said during our most recent therapy session, a new firmness in her voice. "But I'm not sacrificing my relationship with you or my own integrity anymore, regardless of his choice." My grandchildren had visited twice without their parents' weekends, that filled my modest home with laughter and simple pleasures. Emma and I had baked cookies together, her small hands covered in flour as she carefully measured ingredients. Liam had discovered my old record player in the attic, listening in wide-eyed wonder to vinyl albums from decades before his birth. "Grandma's house is the best," Emma had declared on their last visit, chocolate smeared around her smiling mouth. "We can be messy here." Surprisingly, Linda had become something of an ally, reaching out regularly with phone calls and occasional lunch invitations. She was fighting her own battle with Richard over their son's behavior, insisting on accountability where they had previously offered only indulgence. "Thomas isn't speaking to me either," she had confided during our last lunch. "But I've lived long enough to know that sometimes being right means being temporarily alone. He needs to face consequences to understand that treating people as accessories or obstacles isn't acceptable, no matter how much money or influence you have." The doorbell rang, pulling me from these reflections. My dinner guests were arriving. I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath, and went to welcome Martha and our community center friends into my home. The evening unfolded in a tapestry of good food, better conversation, and genuine laughter. We crowded around my dining table elbows, occasionally bumping wine glasses refilled without ceremony. No one commented on my mismatched chairs or the simple pottery dishes that held our meal. No one cared that my home wasn't in the right neighborhood or that my sweater wasn't a designer brand. After dessert, as we lingered over coffee, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica. "Just checking if we're still on for Christmas dinner at your place next week. The kids are so excited. I've talked with Thomas and he's agreed to come with conditions we can discuss tomorrow. Baby steps. Love you, Mom." I looked up from the message to find Martha watching me with knowing eyes. "Good news?" she asked. "Hopeful news, only," I replied, putting the phone away and rejoining the conversation. Later, after my guests had gone home with hugs and promises to meet again soon, I stood in my kitchen washing the last of the dishes by hand, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of having hosted a successful gathering. On my refrigerator, held by magnets from various travels, hung my grandchildren's artwork, a calendar marked with community center events, and a quote Martha had given me: "The greatest gift you can give yourself is the refusal to remain in places where your worth is questioned." Standing at my sink hands in warm, soapy water, I reflected on how walking out with that Thanksgiving turkey had been both an ending and a beginning. An ending to years of diminishing myself to fit others' expectations. A beginning to a life lived with clearer boundaries, deeper connections, and authentic self-respect. The Christmas dinner Jessica mentioned would be a test of these new boundaries. Thomas would be present, likely still resentful and resistant to the changes in his wife and in our family dynamic. But this time, the gathering would happen on terms that acknowledged everyone's inherent dignity. No one would be relegated to the status of the help. No one would be made to feel less than. That was my non-negotiable condition, one Jessica now understood and supported. As I dried the last plate and put it away, I thought about how fundamentally my perspective had shifted. I no longer measured my worth by my daughter's approval or by comparison to those with more wealth or status. I had found a sense of value that came from within, reinforced by genuine connections with people who saw and appreciated me for exactly who I was. The journey wasn't over. Relationships, like gardens, require constant tending. Old patterns can resurface in moments of stress or uncertainty. But I had found my voice, remembered my strength, and surrounded myself with people who nourished rather than diminished my spirit. In the end, the most surprising lesson of that Thanksgiving was that sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do is walk away, at least temporarily, from situations that deny your fundamental worth. It isn't selfish to require basic respect. It isn't unkind to establish boundaries against mistreatment, even from family. In fact, it may be the greatest gift you can give to everyone involved, offering them the opportunity to recognize what truly matters before it's too late. I turned off the kitchen light and moved through my quiet house at peace with who I was and the life I had built. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but tonight I rested in the knowledge that I had found my way back to myself, and no one would ever again convince me that I deserved a seat anywhere but at the table. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from a situation to preserve your dignity and self-respect, or have you regretted not doing so? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a seat at the table too. Thank you for spending this time with me, and remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by the truth of who you are.